DAI are absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Keith Murphy as part of our Adult Dyslexia Webinar series. Dr. Keith is a friend of DAI's and has had a remarkable educational journey, which he will detail for us shortly. Dr. Keith's story is certainly one of resilience, bravery, and determination. The webinar will be about an hour in length. We'll aim to finish between 6:30 and 7:15, and we're going to allow lots of time for Q&A thereafter. As I said, the session is being recorded, but we're going to stop when we open the floor to questions. My colleague Quiva and I will also pop our email addresses in the chat box should anyone want to follow up with us if they have any queries relating to adult dyslexia. And tonight's webinar is part one of our series with Dr. Keith, and we will look forward to welcome him back in the coming weeks for part two, where he will be talking about his doctoral research, his findings, and its implications for the field of dyslexia research. And so without further delay, I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Keith Murphy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks a million for having me. And I am delighted to be here sharing, I suppose, my own journey with you. Thanks for the doctor emphasis. It feels very strange to hear the ringing of it. So I suppose in terms of dyslexia and myself and my educational journey, and you'll have to forgive me, I do have notes even though I'm talking about myself, but as I'm sure we all know, when you come under pressure with this dyslexia, sometimes you can forget even about your own self, you know. But I was in school, I suppose secondary school in the 80s. It wasn't a great time. It wasn't a great place to be. And I think when you had a Pacific learning difficulty or something going on, it wasn't, it was a terrible place to be, I suppose, because they didn't really understand and nobody really knew about it. So school and secondary school was a blip. I never knew I had it. They never knew I had it. They just constantly said lazy, class clown, can do it, but needs to try harder. And I'm sure lots of people have heard that on their journeys themselves. So I decided then in, I suppose, second year of secondary that I had enough and that books weren't for me. So I decided that I'd leave. And I was kind of told you can't leave without a job. So I thought, well, that's grand. I have an out now. So I got a job and became a painter. But unfortunately then, well, I was a painter for most of my days and I loved it, enjoyed it. It was what I always wanted to do and I did it and I loved it. And it was kind of a safe job. You didn't have to read much. You didn't have to engage much. You just had to go and do your thing. In 2007, then I had quite a serious accident and I couldn't paint anymore. And I suppose it took about a year and a half, you know, to kind of recover to the kind of the stage I'm at now, which is not fully recovered, but recovered enough, you know. So I then decided that I'd had to upskill, change my career, etc. So I had my own business and I couldn't get any money, so I was in rehab and they suggested going to their college, National Learning Network, and doing a course because FOSS paid you, you know. So that was the only reason I went back to school. And I did, you know, this European driver's license in computers. So I started on that. So that was March 2008. And then it's mad because when you go back and then you choose to do something, you start to do it, like you really like it. Like I loved being back in the classroom environment, but there's a huge support network for you. So it was different and I love being there and learning again. So just to kind of reverse back a little bit, I never had a problem with learning. Like when I was in school, I loved learning. You know, you struggle with the books as we all do, but I still wouldn't have a problem reading it. And I loved learning, but I just hate the way they tried to teach you. But, you know, I learned in college then later that they call it a banking method, where, you know, they give you the information, you deposit in your head, and then you sit an exam and you withdraw it and lodge it on a paper, you know. And it didn't work for me anyway. But I went there and then we went on a trip to Maynooth, you know, a day out. Another way the adult educations are great. You get days out and stuff like that. Went to Maynooth and I met a fella there. Michael Kenny was his name, and you wouldn't mind me saying his name. I met him, and then I said to him, "What do you have to do to be like you?" And he was saying, "Well," I said, "No, I want to be a lecturer, you know." So he told me what I had to do. So I said, "Right, that's grand. I'll see you in about 2020. I'll be back, you know." And it's yeah. Anyway, I stayed with the NLN. Then I did a level 3, a level 4, a level 5, and then they helped me then with some funding, and I did a level 7 certificate in psychology. So then that was in 2009. So that kind of gave me entrance then into an arts degree in Maynooth. So I went there and I did a 3-year undergraduate degree, and I did HDIP in adult teaching, and then I did a master's in education. And then I entered the competition and I won, and I won what's known as a John Young Scholarship. So you might have heard of John Young, the peace activist. He was funding scholarship Maynooth for a PhD. So I won that anyway, which was good. But still just sailing along, you know, didn't know I have dyslexia, just thought I was kind of, I don't know. And I'm probably going to use some words or language that, you know, I don't mean to be offensive or offend anybody or anything. I'm purely talking about myself when I say these words. Like, but you know, sometimes I thought I was a bit slow, or I wasn't as clever as the next fella, or whatever else, you know. And it was interesting to listen to Jane McGrath. I don't know if anybody heard it, and her title being "Comparison is the thief of joy." Right? I thought it was brilliant because. And then one of my daughters told me, she said, "That's a famous quote, Alex. Never heard that before." And I said, "No," but I didn't. But I just thought it was brilliant because I spent a lot of time in my undergraduates, like all my mates it was all the mature students, we all became friends. They used to call us the nodding dogs, you know, because you'd sit in the lecture and we'd be all going, yeah. And you remember them dogs used to be on the back of the car. I think it was an English bulldog, and be all, yeah. So we were the nodding dogs up the front of the class with our notebooks writing like mad. I mean, I've books in there from college, my undergraduate, that thick with notes that I don't think I've ever read, and I don't even think I'd be able to read my own writing, however. But all these guys and girls I was pals with, and incidentally, one of them had worked for Dyslexia Ireland many years ago, and she used to always say to me, "Oh, you need to go and get tested or whatever." So, but I'd compare myself to them. They were all getting first class honours, etc. So it really took a lot of the joy from college away from me, because of that comparing thing that people do, you know. So that's why I laughed when I read the quotation that Jane had said. But I found the college very difficult, okay, because I studied anthropology, which is study of culture, and you're looking at behavior and what people do in society and stuff like this. And they have like their own language, and their words are like really ridiculously long. And I mean, even now, I can't spell half of the words, and I can't even say half of the words, but it's grand now because they just say, "Yeah, well, I have a piece of paper that lets me say whatever way I want." So then people kind of just whatever, you know, accept it. But I found it hard. I mean, the reading was ridiculous, and the writing was ridiculous, and the trying to comprehend things. You sit in an hour, someone just gives you all this information, and you're writing like mad, and nothing worked really for me in that sense. But kind of then, as the second and third year went on, I started to develop a few strategies that suited me, and I'll share them with you later on. So if I ever shut up talking. So I then, this friend of mine kept saying to me, "Look, every year was getting harder. You know, the expectation on me was getting harder. You get to level 9, you're a master, you're supposed to be blah, 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 blah." And I just found it really difficult. So then I won the scholarship and I started in 2016, and then that was like just blew my head off. I was on the verge of just quitting because it was so difficult, you know. If you think level 10, everything's be perfect and that. So then she suggested I get tested again, as she had done for years before. So I took the plunge and I got tested. And then that was 2017. And when I did, sorry, I have to wear the glasses now from all the reading on the computers. But I found out in 2017, then I went to the AI and I got tested. And I don't know, it was like this magical moment or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was like the light was turned on, because it kind of meant, do you know, like, I don't know, I found that my dyslexia, like, there was a lot of shame attached to it. And there was a lot of, you know, anger, frustration. particularly with the system and what they were making us do. And I mean, everybody was having to do it. It wasn't just me. It was 490 or something in my first year class. But you know, you focus on yourself kind of, and you internalize all of this, you know. And then when I found out, like, the relief was massive, like, to realize that, oh, you know, I'm not actually dopey or stupid or as thick as the other fella, you know. It was just something that I thought differently. So it wasn't something wrong with me. I just had to think a different way, and I had to learn different strategies and stuff like that. So there was huge relief. I was very happy. Then, you know, I was angry because I was kind of saying, why was this not picked up before, etc., etc. And then I was very frustrated that the system wasn't there and they didn't have the supports in place. And although there is supports available, if you come to kind of the next discussion, you'll realize that it's a one fit all, and it doesn't really work. And the engagement is very low, I found, you know. So then I continued with that, and it was great with the PhD because I knew that, and then I got supports, and then last year I finished it. I had to do the void and the examination and all, you know, and but worked out well. I have it on now, and I'm happy out. So I'm just going to talk a little bit then further kind of about how I would identify with it and some of the strategies and stuff like that, because that's kind of like the educational journey there that I was on, and when I found out. But I have to say, the finding out was probably a brilliant moment. And going back to the title of my own talk here, Seen But Unseen, the but is B-U-T-T, and it's not what you're sitting on. It's a deliberate play on words, being dyslexic and just deliberate play on words. And a lot of the writing I do, it's very much a play on words also. And that's a title. So in 2017, then when I found out, I wrote a poem called Seen But Unseen. And if it's okay with you, it's kind of at the end of the talk, I'll read that out, and you can see what you think. But it's interesting because it's the not known, the known, and then the joy of knowing, if you know what I mean. And there's one or two naughty words, so I'll ask your forgiveness beforehand, okay? And my PhD actually is titled Experiencing Dyslexia Through the Prism of Difference. And what it really is that just trying to look at it like it's a disability 100%, and we need that title for us to get the supports and all, but it's kind of looking at it, yes, as a disability, but not as disabling, as being different. We're different, we learn different, we articulate different, and once you learn the strategies, then you get through and you can do it. So that's what it's about, and it's in anthropology, and it's about students who have dyslexia navigating toward level education. So but we'll talk about that again. So I suppose then I have to look at how do I identify with my dyslexia, and again, this is only me, you know. And I suppose even growing up, I had my own ideas about what these things were, you know, the way you get preconceived ideas yourself and you have prejudice or whatever else, and kind of then I would internalize that because I wasn't, you know, I was achieving well in college, but like sometimes people are writing things like in an hour or reading things in an hour, and I could be 12, 14 hours, and like, I don't know about yourselves, but when I kind of start, I don't stop. Like, I push myself to the end to make sure I get through it, so as I can try and be the same, you know. And so that finding out I had it was brilliant, because I got a lot of, obviously when you get the report, there's loads of tips and that and things for me to kind of look at to help myself get through. But like, identifying with dyslexia for me was a massively important stage of all of this, because I think acceptance is massive. You've got to accept it, and you have to accept then that as a part of you. And that was something you know, it took me time to get my head around that, and to kind of work my way around it and to accept it, you know. But again, once you accept it, the biggest thing for me was just, you know, finding how I kind of maneuver now life with it, and how I kind of get through college, so to speak, or education, And don't forget, it's not like, I'm not just saying about college, like any kind of learning at all, even if it's going back to do any sort of a course, you still have the same difficulties when you have dyslexia, whether, no matter what the level you're learning, or no matter what you're training in, or whatever else, you know. But I found the biggest thing for me was I had to find what works. So I found what works for me, and I used what works for me. I had to stop worrying about other people. Like I say, comparing yourself, worrying about what they're getting, what they're doing, what they're not doing. That was very important for me. And I made a kind of a pact with myself that, you know, I wasn't, like, I was going to identify. I was going to own it. It was mine. I wasn't letting other people own it. Okay. And I wasn't going to let other people name it or talk about it. That I was going to advocate for myself. Like, I'm a person with dyslexia. You know what I mean? So I have loads of different things, and I'm loads of different parts, and that's just one part of me. I won't let people define it, you know. You know, like, people say, oh yeah, look at him, he has a PhD and he has dyslexia as well, like, you know. So I don't let people use that language if I can avoid it, you know, without getting myself in any trouble now. But I do. So I decided, like, that I would work kind of, so like, I made a pact. I'm going to work in partnership with it. So I'm going to work with the dyslexia, as opposed to, you know, the way sometimes you can work against things. So I find out what works, use it, and work alongside, and don't worry what anybody else was doing. I then, a big thing for me then was kind of, it's like a coming out, and you know, I found out a bit of this when I was doing the research. Like, it's like you come out, you know. So you have to come out as identifying, okay, you know, I'm a person with dyslexia, and that's it. And when you start accepting that and identifying positively with it, in that sense, it's a bit like a coming out experience. So I found that was a hard part for me, because it meant other people knew then, you know. So whatever about your lecturers or support staff or teachers or whatever, it meant other people knew then, and then they all have notions of what you should or shouldn't be because you have it. And then you've got to engage with the supports, and that was gas for me, because we didn't sit exams with everybody else in the college then. We got like a special room, and we'd get extra time and all that business. So it was kind of, you were forming these little like subcultural groups of, you know, all the people with dyslexia were in that room, and all the people were out in this big huge room. So then, you know, I remember after one of the exams in the masters, someone coming up and saying to one of the people who was with us, and I don't think they had dyslexia, they had something different, but it was like, oh, where were you? You missed the exam and all, you know. And she said, oh no, I do, and I do my exams at this other room. And it was like, oh my God, like, you know, putting them out there. So it was real. Well, you're coming out, and people are knowing about it, and does that change their opinion of you, etc. And then this whole idea then around the language, and then their perception of, you know, identifying your achievements with your dyslexia, not just with Keith, but with Keith, and he has dyslexia, you know. So I kind of, now I'm talking maybe in the last year or two, I've stopped that from happening. So I, you know, I accepted it, used all the supports, and then, as I say, the advocating bit, I mean, you probably gathered I can talk, and I can certainly talk for myself, so I do, but particularly for others. I know it was a lot of the time that, you know, people are kind of maybe not as advanced in the acceptance stage as you are or whatever, so I always found it important to try and identify if people are struggling, and then help and advocate for them, you know. And then don't be afraid. Like, I always found, when I started identifying positively, like, I wasn't afraid to, not promote it, but I wasn't afraid to talk about it, and I'm certainly not afraid to talk about neurodiversity or neurobiological issues or anything like that. I'd be out there, and maybe that's because I've got a lot more confidence with all of the studying and that. And then I would tell people, because I'd rather tell them I have it than for them to make an assumption or a, you know, preconceived idea on me. I'd rather say I have it, and so it's gone back to that thing of me owning it, not them owning it, you know. And then it allows me to define it, and allows me to say what it is, rather than other people, you know. And that's kind of a lot around that accepting and all, but like, I really do, like, and again, this is me. I'm not saying that, or I'm not dissing anybody or disrespecting anybody, but like I look on it as a difference. Yeah, it's definitely a disability, and we need that for all the stuff that we need. But I look on it as kind of, to me, like I won't let it stop me doing anything. I'll do whatever I have to do, but I just might do it different than anybody else. So I look on it kind of as a difference, and it helps me. And isn't it great to be different? You know what I mean? It helps me just to be different, and to maneuver around things differently. You know. And I suppose then, in education, then, and kind of that being the theme for this, some of the strategies that I learned, and I will say you do have to work harder. Like it's not as easy a journey for some as others, you know. And you do have to work harder, and you do have to put a lot more effort in. Kind of for me, then I suppose the biggest thing for me was the positivity, and remaining positive and thinking of it positively, and trying to, always make sure that I gave me best. And if that was the best I could do on that day, then that was good enough. Do you know what I mean? I never tried to push myself too hard. Sorry, all the talking. Some of the things I do is particularly the reading, because it's so intense, the reading. And for me, when I read books, I just feel that the words all jump up on top of me, and it jumbles, and I lose my place. And I'll read 3 pages and then I'll say, what the hell was that about? I used to find it hard to retain the stuff. So what I would do is, and I usually tried to buy the books, because I would kind of color the books in. So I would use highlighters. I'd highlight sentences that meant something to me in connection to what I was reading. And then when I'd go back after forgetting about it, I just have to look at the highlight bit, and that really helped me then to, kind of form the information I need. I don't write mad notes anymore, because I found you never read them and you don't know what you're saying really. So I write bullet points to myself. So I might just write 2 or 3 words, and then that will usually fill it in. Like that'd be a perfect example of what I do. I just write, but I don't write pages upon pages, because you don't read it, So that's the one thing, the biggest problem I have is reading. So I try not to make myself read. So I would write little bullet points, and I make lists. So even now, every day I make a list in the morning of what I have to do, and then I put a star beside it if it's really important and has to get done, because otherwise I do forget things, Then I learned a little bit about, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the idea called growth, fixed mindset and growth mindset. So I learned a little bit about that. And I found, like, the fixed mindset, you really are in a little box and you won't come out. And I found for myself, like, people will be giving you feedback and I'll be taking it as criticism rather than learning or critiquing your work or helping you, So I would take it as criticism, and I'd remain in this fixed mindset of, I liken myself to, did anybody ever hear the analogy? Like, in the First World War, and they used to be in the trenches. And then, like, you'd look at fellas who were maybe, I don't know, shot in the first hour they were there, and then other fellas who were kind of like lifers, they were there a long time. So the fellas who used to stick their head up to have a look over the trench would be shot immediately. But the clever ones just kept their head down above, just below the trench line, and they never got shot. So I noticed in school, when I'd put the head up over the trench, I'd be shot down. So then I learned my whole life just to keep below the trench line. So you were never seen. I never put myself out there, And that kind of is that fixed mindset where you remain in that mindset and you never come out of it. With the growth mindset, then I learned it's more about being positively accepting yourself, particularly in education. Nobody's criticizing you, you're getting critique. It's a bit different than the secondary school experience, I suppose. So I learned a good bit about that, and just that kind of remaining in the positive mindset. Now, I won't go into my detail on that and bore you, but it is something I think is very important, that you have to kind of just come out of that mindset that I used to be in. It was quite negative, and I identified negatively with having dyslexia also, So, and don't be embarrassed. That's one thing I learned, and it's one thing I do now, is to stop being embarrassed. I was for a long time. I held a lot of shame around it. But the strategy I use now is I use it like, not as a driving force, but I do. It drives me on. Having dyslexia drives me on, and I use it, to drive me on. And I you know, Leah said about resilience and that, and I do. I think it builds resilience in it, and I think it builds a determination in you. And for me, I just won't let somebody tell me I can't do something. It's probably the worst thing you could ever do is to say that to me. And when you're in education, it kind of defies the logic of having dyslexia and in education. But when you learn some of the strategies that helps you to cope, it's very not easy, but you get through. Now, I have to say, like, I'm not trying to play it down. Like, it's very hard, and you have to work much harder than anybody else. I mean, I 100% acknowledge that. But when I learned all these few things that I do, when I learned them and I said, right, that works, and I just used them, then I found it helped me enormously. And another thing I do is I highlight. So usually I'd highlight something in red because that's my favorite color. I know a lot of people don't, but I highlight it in red, and then in blue I'd highlight a word, and then I just Google the word, and then I'd write beside it in the book what the word meant, because these big words I never remember. When I'll Google the dictionary or whatever, get the definition, I'll never forget. So I write it there, so when I'm back reading it, or if I want to use that word again, I have the exact. Because what I used to do, I used to write these big mad words and these big mad essays, and then the lecturer would say to me, like, that word is just completely out of context. It doesn't mean that there, And I'm going, oh, really? I thought it did. So now I don't do that anymore because I learned the word, And another thing I do as well is probably, shouldn't be telling you, or maybe whatever, but do you know the way you get a book and they say, read the book, I will go and Google a book review. So you might have a 500-page book, because the academia is full of them, and they think the bigger the book, the better it is to give you, where in my teaching now, I try to give a less amount of reading. I think is better, But I would Google a book review, and they're only 3-4 pages long, and that then defines each chapter, what the book's about, what each chapter is about. So then you get a real insight into the book without having to read 500 words. And then you might say, well, chapter 1 means nothing, chapter 2 means nothing. But I like chapter 3, so that's all I'm going to read. So I use that as a little strategy for me. I also theories. I mean, you come across these big mad theories. There's so many of them out there. And I mean, especially in anthropology, there's so many different strands to it and so many different theories and theorists. So I Google the theorist and get a bit of background on them and see what they're about, what they do, what their favorite things are and stuff like that, like their theories. And then I will Google the theories they come up with. So, I don't know, maybe something like functionalism or social constructionism or something like that. The big words that you go, what does that mean? But then I just quickly Google it and it gives me an insight. So it's not that I'm trying to like cheat or whatever else. I still have to read the stuff I have, but I'm reading it with a bit of an insight into it. I'm not reading a blank, So there's some of the things I do, And then I suppose even today, I've been shifting around in that house since I got up out of bed this morning. They love when I'm doing a talk because I clean the house. The house is spotless in there because I'll do anything other than face what I had to do at 6 o'clock. And fair play to Leah and Queeve. They're on since 5:45, calming me down, and we're talking about the weather and everything else. But I find talking like this extremely difficult for people who have dyslexia, and even for myself. So, I do make bullet points. And if I'm going into class and I'm listening to something, and like I've often sat there and thought, well, I'm going to ask this question. Then I go, no, that's a stupid question. Then someone else asks, and it's like an amazing question. I'm just going, oh, that's a great question. And you're going, that's exactly what I was going to ask. But then a few other times I go to ask the question, you'd be like that, and you wouldn't be able to get the words out, and then that just totally freaks you out, And actually, that's interesting because I found one of the main findings in my PhD was about that. And there's an anthropologist, Ellen Basso is her name, and she talked about voice suppression. And that's what happens then. We automatically suppress our own voice. And then I come up with this idea, which then, that in turn then, and some other things, I won't go too deep into it, but there's another one called a vicissitude. I try and say that now, I'll tell you. And that's a theory whereby it's like when you have an ordeal that creates pain, you subconsciously keep burying it, and then it leads to this voice suppression. And then I come up kind of the idea that then that leads to academic imprisonment. So you imprison yourself in the academic world, and you don't have the best experience or the wonderful experience that you should have when you do it, because it's great being back in education as well at any level. So I talk about that. So if I'm going to ask a question in the class, I write the question out first and then see what the question looks like. So then when I'm going to ask the question, I just read it out. Nobody cares if you're reading it out. Like, everybody has notes, everybody's doing something. So I read it because I find when you talk in class, everybody's usually focused on you. And then I freeze and I get all stuttery and I stumble and I forget. So I find, so I don't know. I see one of my former students on there, and he'll be able to tell you exactly. I always say, if you fail to plan, then you may plan to fail. And I don't mean in an exam, and I just mean in general. So I always plan, and I'm sure you are probably the same, over planning, you know. So they're just a few things that I do, you know. And I guess for me on a personal level, I kind of didn't know I had it for so long. I obviously knew something was wrong, but I just thought it was like, you know, I was dopey or stupid or whatever, because that's what you were told, you know. And you know, if you tell someone often enough. But what I have discovered since I have discovered I have dyslexia is that it builds amazing resilience in you. It builds amazing techniques for you thinking outside of your box. You're not streamlined at all. Do you ever notice that about yourself? I think it gives us an amazing ability to write, because again, we're not thinking streamlining, and we kind of are very good at storytelling, you know. So I think that that's a huge help for us. You know, it gives you real doggedness, because you're like the dog with the bone, you just won't let go, you know. So I think that's great as well. I think going forward, for me, acceptance was really the key. Accepting, right, this is it, I have it, and this is what I have to do, and that's fine. I had to work hugely more hours, and I'd put a lot more in. And I'm not saying because I'm better than anybody, but I noticed with the people I was studying with, I was putting in 2, 3, 4 times more work than them. But once I got to know how to do it, I kind of then leveled back up again. Once I learned, because I mean, I can tell you all the things I do, but it may not suit you. Once you find what you do, then I think that's a huge help for you, you know. And I do think having a positive identity is the key. I think it's very important for you. And particularly, like, you know, we're very self-critical. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've got to, you know, we talk to ourselves kind of sometimes in a negative way. I think when you change that around, it's part of the growth mindset. When you change that idea around and you know, be a bit nicer to yourself and start thinking more positively about your identity and stuff like that, I think that really helps, you know. So I guess, like I said, I own it now. I don't give it away, and I don't let anybody else own it. I own it, I say it, everyone knows it, and that's it. And that was very difficult actually for me, because I suppose with my job, like, I work as a lecturer now, you know, and I suppose, like, if you can kind of imagine yourself, how would you feel going in on a fella who has dyslexia starting to teach you, and particularly when it comes to writing skills and research skills and all, like, so it was kind of hard for me to accept that at the beginning when I found out, but then I did, you know. So kind of like that's kind of really all I wanted to say. I hope that's fine with you. I hope you learned something there. And what I was going to do was read out my poem. So if that's all right, I'll read the poem. It only takes a couple of seconds, but it might help us to end on a bit more of a lighter note, as opposed to the one we've been on. And it's kind of just about not known, and then the moving on from that. And I suppose I should say poem, use the term very lightly. I don't think William Wordsworth or James Joyce will be turning in their grave anytime soon when you hear this. And coarse words, apologies for them, right? Sit down, shut up, you're dumb, said my secondary school teacher, you're going to end up a bum. I actually believed I was dumb, and that's why into her French class I could not come. If I stay in school, they'll say I'm a fool, so I'll get a job and I'll earn a few bob. The trenches are dark and also deep. Just below the trench line, my head I must keep. To what was said, I really did care, so never again would I put myself out there. So I left school, convinced I was a fool, and I entered the workforce where they used the tool. Call it fate or call it luck, but an accident forced me back to the book. A computer course with office skills, this adult learning has given me some thrills. From level 3, 5 and 4 to Maynooth University, they all opened the door. However, all the while, the struggle got greater. It was a constant battle not to say, I'll see you later. Where you been, or is it being? I was over there, or is it there? Where, I just don't care. I write, but it still looks like shite. I try, yet I still feel like the dumb boy. Remember the trenches where they hide the imposters. It takes all my efforts not to turn to the fosters. I feel so stupid and my head can hurt. At times I wish I could bury it in the dirt. She said to me, get your head out of the sand, all will be grand. Let's take a test, it'll be for the best. The test says dyslexia. Is that why I'm shy? Reading the report helps turn on a light. It was like leaving a tunnel, it's suddenly bright. This piece of paper says I am neither dumb, stupid, or shy. This dyslexia I got has stored up the pot. It's a gift I've been handed to become a learning bandit. When I was young, school was no fun. I was just bold because I couldn't do it how I was told. But now as an adult, this learning is fun. It feels like I stepped out of the night into the sun. And this is because my dyslexia is a gift that has ended my constant internal rift. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. And we're open for questions. If anybody would like a question, hopefully I can answer it. And the guys have my email if anybody wants to stay in touch or drop me a line or anything like that.